Welcome to the Power of Nature podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Waldo. In this show, I talk about how nature and the natural world can communicate with us, how it can communicate directly and individually with each of us, and how this can create immeasurable benefits for us in our lives. I share stories of my experiences doing this as part of a regular and ongoing practice, and I talk to others about their experiences with the power of nature as well. So join me as we go on a journey of learning about the power of nature, how it can communicate directly with us, and the impact that it can have on our own lives. Welcome back to the Power of Nature podcast. In today's episode, I'm talking about the power of birds and how birds can communicate with us, how they've communicated with me, just probably a few stories, because they've communicated with me a lot, and the amazing impact that they've had on my life. So let's dive into this. I was slated, meaning when I sat down to think about this next episode, I was like, I'll continue talking about trees. And boy, do I have a lot to say about trees. If you listen to episode 11 about trees, and it's part 1 of what will be several episodes likely about trees, you will have heard some serious ways trees have had an impact on my life. And that's just really touching, just barely scratching the surface. But I was sitting here in my office, in my studio, looking out at nature, at a mountain, looking at trees, just looking at the clouds, looking at the sky while I'm sitting here. And what happened? A bird flew right over onto my roof. And it's not unusual for birds to fly on the roof in front of my office, but this one went right in front of my window and landed right on the roof, kind of where I was already looking. And I've learned enough to know that when this happens, it is not random. Like, I wasn't just out watching a bunch of birds fly by and this is one of the many birds. No, I was out sitting and kind of like tuning into myself about the things that I'm going to be doing and what I wanted to do in this podcast and some other things. And this bird flew by, and it flew right in front of me on the corner of my roof, which is not where I usually see birds go. And this is what I mean. It's not random. It isn't random. Now, I thought, because I'm tuned into this, I understand about the power of nature. And I thought, I think that I should focus on birds for this episode. And I was just like, okay, that's what I think I'm going to be open to do. And then I went outside to feed my horses. And as I was doing so, I needed to change their water. And I went over to the one pasture where we didn't have any water in the pasture because we haven't used it in a few days. And I started to put some water in the one tub. And lo and behold, this little bird comes right on a branch above me, just really close, within a couple of feet, really, and I know that the bird was really appreciating the water because I was kind of putting some water in the tub, and then I put some water out, like I kind of created a little pool in the ground because sometimes the tubs, they're pretty deep and it could be hard for a bird to get into them. So I filled the one tub up with just a little bit of water, and then I filled the other one up full. And then I also put some on the ground for the birds. But it was a clear kind of feeling again. It was kind of like this feeling like this bird showed up on that branch and I was called to fill up that water right now and move my horses to that pasture for a reason. It wasn't random. And this is something that I have experienced over and over again with a lot of animals, and with so many aspects of nature. I mean, if you've listened to the episodes so far that I've done, you can hear over and over again how different aspects of nature have, benefited me. There are things that nature has done. Now, we're going to dive into birds a lot more because there's so much I have to say about birds. Whether you're a bird lover or not, I just so you know, I was not what I would call a bird person before birds started to kind of make their presence known in my life. I wasn't against them. I wasn't anti-bird at all, but I didn't really think about it until later I realized they've kind of been a presence in my life. I just hadn't recognized it until a certain point. I didn't really understand what was going on. I didn't really understand the power of nature, and I didn't understand how nature, can benefit us and how nature can communicate with us. Now, I recently did kind of a big overhaul of my messaging for what I do because, as is often the case, when we start listening to ourselves, which is what I realize is so much about what I've been doing my whole life, is learning how to listen to myself, but also how to trust myself. And so I made a big decision to really focus everything I do around that because I've already been kind of doing that. I just kind of wasn't I was clear on it, but I wasn't as clear as I am now. But as part of this, this is the thing. When we start listening to ourselves, we start to get more clear within ourselves. And this is what I talk about in all of my shows, in all of my podcasts, in all of everything I do. Everything I've always done, I realize has always been about this, helping myself do this, learning how to do this, learning how it doesn't work, learning how it does work, and also sharing with other people what I've learned, and also supporting other people in their journeys of doing this. I've just kind of naturally done this. Sometimes I've done this in a paid role. Sometimes I've done it in a non-paid role, but it's innate in me. And the thing that I realized is that really nature, the power of nature benefits us because nature communicates with us. Nature is always communicating with us. But if we're not aware that it's communicating with us, we often don't understand that it is communicating with us or what it is communicating. So let me clarify that again. If we are not aware that nature is and can communicate with us, we will continue to not, it's like our door is closed, right? It's like our door is closed, right? Like if you have a front door and your door is open, you're saying, come on in. I'm open to you. I'm open to you to come in. And when we have our door closed because we don't think there's any reason to open it, then we don't have anyone coming in. And this is something that I have learned through listening to myself. That if I don't open the door for myself to listen to myself, I'm not going to hear myself. And I've learned that when I listen to myself, things work way better in my life. Well, one of the ways that I have learned that we can listen to ourselves is through nature. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I actually believe it's because we are all, energetically connected, kind of at our source level, at the basis of what we are, the energy that we are. We are in different forms, but we, we are made of something alive and, not man-made. So what that means is that when we tune into nature, we actually can, and nature can help us tune more into ourselves. And that's what I've been talking about, kind of sharing story after story after story and all the episodes up until now of how this has been happening to me, how I started doing this, how I've done this over the years, how it's made massive changes in my life about choices I've made and how I've decided to live my life and all of it, and how it's benefited me. But it started by realizing and understanding and becoming proactive to the idea that I have a part of me that communicates or can communicate with me, and that's my own inner self. But nature is also communicating to us. And what I have found is that nature is in sync with what we are really asking our own selves to know. It's like nature has the same playbook. I don't know. I'm very football oriented right now because my oldest son has gotten into football. So I don't know. Do they call it a playbook? I'm new to football, but I think that's what they call it. It's almost like nature has the same playbook, right, as us. And so then nature will communicate to us about stuff that's relevant to us. And yet that same aspect of nature can communicate something else to somebody else that has a different playbook of where they're at and what they're looking to understand in their life. There's not just like one communication. It doesn't work like that. That's what I've discovered. That's what I've experienced time and time again. I can have a very different experience, say, with a tree than my husband can. And it doesn't mean either one is good or bad. But I have found that the tree can communicate with me the stuff that is relevant for me in that moment and could communicate with my husband. So this is so important that I actually have made a decision to, change the subtitle of this podcast. This podcast is new, and so I'm actually, changing the subtitle to Inspiration and Stories of How Nature Can Communicate with Us. Because I think a lot of people know that nature can benefit us. We know like, oh yeah, you go for a walk in the woods and, it's peaceful, or, going on vacation and being in nature is beneficial. I think most people generally know that. Whether they commit to do that as part of an ongoing practice in their life because they realize it's so beneficial depends on the person and where they're at. But what I really find that I'm trying to convey in this podcast is not only all the amazing benefits that you can get from nature, but the fact that it is a communication. And it really is a communication that supports us listening to us. And think of nature as kind of being like a subscriber to the same playbook of our own inner selves that has our best interests at heart. So to that end, I'm actually going to change the subtitle on all the podcast episodes already to date and the cover art and all of that. And so you'll hear, if you've listened to this show before, you're going to hear, that change, that subtitle change. Now, that in and of itself is something to share, because where did that idea come to me? It came from nature. I was sitting here looking out at nature and reflecting nature, reflecting. I was taking in nature. I was observing nature. I'm sitting here in my office, which I have nature things, natural things all around me. I have paintings that are of nature and inspired by nature. I have natural and, nature oriented items all through my office. I have many living aspects of nature, more like the domesticated nature kind of stuff, like animals and whatever. Although my pet mice are probably they're still they're kind of wild. I kind of let them live and live and let live. But my point is that I'm inspired by nature, and it was nature that kind of communicated with me to remind me that nature is always communicating. So here I am, a person that's wanting to share and reach more people with what I have learned, and nature inspired me with another way of how to do that better, I think more effectively. And this is the point that I'm trying to share in this podcast over and over and over again, about how nature, is such an amazing way for us to, it really start understanding how to listen to ourselves. But I find it so much easier to listen to ourselves in nature, because it's like nature just supports that whole process. It's like it's conducive to that whole process. And I've learned this over and over and over again. So that's what I talk about in the show. Now, let's talk about birds. All right. And I know I'm sure this is going to be just a part one of birds, because so many things about birds. There's so many stories I have to share about birds. Oh my gosh, so many stories I think I've forgotten. So when I saw this bird on my roof today, and I thought about, because it wasn't a should, you have to. It was an inspiration. Oh, wow, that feels right. It feels right to talk about birds. It just feels right. So I was like, okay, that's the way I roll these days. So it feels right. That's what I'm going to do. As I thought for just a moment, and I don't script out anything that I talk about or anything like that. I never have, even when I first started podcasting in 2018, but now I do nothing. But because this kind of impulse just literally came to me, I took a moment to just kind of let myself, just kind of like sit with this idea. And the first, kind of like the first experience that I was really aware of how birds communicated with me is something that I realized. I was like, oh, I want to share that, because that was really big. I really want to share that story. And so that's what I'm going to do. We're going to dive in. Oddly enough, well, not oddly enough, it was later though that I was kind of thinking, that's really, this story that I'm about to share is kind of like, if I reach back and think about my experiences with birds, I kind of think, well, that's probably the first really significant experience I had with birds. or so I thought. And this is the funny thing that you can come to realize when you start listening to yourself more, just in all the ways I talk about in all my shows, but also through nature, is that you often wake up. It's kind of like you suddenly become aware or conscious of things that you couldn't see before. And I had this awareness that even though the story that I'm about to tell you about a bird was my earliest true awareness of a bird, and then how it kind of like caused me to make a very different choice in my life. And so to me, it felt like the first time a bird really kind of like really affected me and changed the trajectory of me. But I completely forgot about how much I also, like, I think birds had been trying to get my attention for a very long time. And I think they had been, but I wasn't open in the way that I was starting at the time that I'm going to tell you about this story, which was in Rome, Italy. My point is, I remember as a kid that we used to have these little families of cardinals and bluebirds that would live across from our kitchen window. We had like a driveway with some trees, and the birds would be in those trees. And I used to love watching them. I used to love them watching them have their little nests and their babies and all of that. I didn't and wasn't conscious at that time of anything other than it just seemed like something that I liked. It just seemed like something. I thought they were pretty, and I thought they were just kind of cool. And I was fascinated, by their colors, like the different coloring, like the cardinals, how one it can be like bright red, and then the other ones are more like brown and not such bright red, and then the coloring of the blue jays, and just them taking care of their babies. But that was a communication. It really was. And I think it was the precursor. And there are probably many more that I will come to be aware of later on that I will realize had always been in my life. I just wasn't aware of it. So let's dig into when I started to really be aware of birds, or what a bird could do or say to me. Not with words, because birds don't use words, but communicate in some other way. So we're going to rewind back. If you've listened to some of my other shows, you've probably heard parts of this story, maybe about the bird. I'm not sure. I was 22, I think it was. Had finished college, somewhere around there. I had just finished college, and I was on a trip I was in Europe. The short version of this very long story is that I had been living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is where I went to college to get my bachelor's degree. And afterwards, I decided I didn't want to live there. I wanted to live somewhere further. Well, not as much further, but somewhere warm. And I wanted it to be a city by the beach. And I thought I wanted to move to San Diego, California. So I had come up with a plan to be able to move from Pittsburgh to San Diego. But somewhere along the way, somehow this idea of going to Europe came into my awareness as well, which seemed impossible because I was a poor college student who had worked full-time through college, and I had looming student loans that were set to start really quickly. And I did not have parents that were going to pay for any of it, none of it. But somehow, some way, this is stuff I talk about a lot in all my other shows, I've talked about it in past podcasts, is that there are amazing things that happen when you start listening to yourself. And the amazing things that happened when I started listening to myself is I found ways to be able to do both of these things. One was come up with a whole kind of plan to be able to move to California and actually have it kind of happen. And the other thing is be able to go on what I thought was going to be a 6-week backpacking trip across Europe, staying in youth hostels. I don't even know if they still have those anymore, but they were like really cheap. You basically live dormitory style. I think it was like, $20 or $30 to spend the night. And you get a Eurail pass. You're on a train and you carry all your crap in a backpack. You start off with a very heavy backpack because you think you need a lot of stuff, and then you get rid of a lot of stuff because you realize your back is going to can't handle all that stuff, and you cut it down to the essentials, but you basically have a backpack, a Eurail pass, and you're going to youth hostels. So that's what I was going to do. That's what I could afford to do. I worked a bunch of jobs to save up enough money. And along the way, a friend decided she was going to come with me, which is important to the story. And now here we are. I'm in Europe. Now, I was in Europe, and where I was sitting on a bench in the city of Rome in Italy. I was on a bench in a piazza. It was Piazza di Popolo. My pronunciation is probably not great, but I distinctly remember it. As a matter of fact, in my memory, this is so strong. I feel like I could close my eyes and feel myself go back there. And believe me, I am not 22 anymore. It's been a long time since then. Been through a whole lot of life since then. Okay, so this is how strong this memory is. I was sitting on a bench in Piazza di Popolo in Italy. I was about 3 weeks into my 6-week itinerary of my trip. And I was really, 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 really unhappy and confused and scared. And did I say scared? Because I mean terrified. Terrified. Literally terrified. And yet felt like something was going on. Like something was calling me. Something was trying to communicate with me. I could feel it, but I was so scared. I didn't know what it meant and what to do. And I was just kind of a mess. And I had been. The reason I was a mess is because my well-intentioned brain had come up with a whole plan for how I was going to go on this trip, this 6-week backpacking trip to Europe. A friend decided she wanted to come along, and then the same friend and I were going to move to San Diego from Pittsburgh. So when I had left, before I'd left on this trip, I had finished up my lease in my apartment that I had been living in. I gave notice to my job. I had some professional interviews for jobs in my field that I had turned down, in an economy where jobs were not that easy to get as a new college graduate. I'd turned those down in favor of moving and going on this trip. I had even met a guy that I was like, nope, not doing that. After not having found any guys, I suddenly, of course, meet a guy right before I decide to put this plan in action. And he's a nice guy, but I was like, nope, I'm not staying here. I've got a vision. I am moving. I'm going on a trip and I'm moving. So why was it that I get on this plane and it's so exciting and everything's so wonderful and it all seems fine. And 3 weeks later, I'm sitting on a park bench and I am feeling pretty darn destitute, just completely confused. And I'm sitting there with my journal. Well, what it was is I was about like, I don't know, a week in, a few days in, I don't know, to my trip. My friend that I was traveling with, that I had planned everything with about the trip and the move. Everything I had planned and budgeted for had been on doing it with this friend, not by myself. Originally, I started doing it to do it by myself, but then she wanted to come, and so it was like, okay, we'll do this together and I won't have to, save up as much money because we can share costs and whatever. Well, a short period of time into the trip, she decided she did not want to move to San Diego, California after our trip back. And to say that this put a monkey wrench into my plan and my plans was, in my heart, is an understatement. I basically freaked out. I was freaking out because what was I going to do? I didn't have enough money then by myself to move to San Diego. I had given up my job and my apartment where I had been living, which is where I would be able to get more money. So I couldn't do that. I didn't have any family there that I could live with. I would have to move back into my hometown, which really didn't have any resources for being able to make money living with my parents. So I was basically screwed with a capital S. And to say that it caused a conflict with my friend is an understatement. We started to have a lot of tension and more tension and more tension. And I was in a foreign country, and this was supposed to be this great time. And yet the person I'm there with, I'm experiencing massive tension with. And what I ended up doing, which is something I had done to navigate, a lot of my childhood, is I had started journaling and really found myself, while I enjoyed the city elements, really found myself really benefiting from nature on that trip. So like when I was in the city, like when we were in Paris and when I was in London, I kind of felt a little off. But then we went to Chamonix in the French Alps, and it's like it spoke to me and I started to get more clear. And then we went to Nice, to the French Riviera, and it was pretty cold and weren't outside that much, so that wasn't good. It didn't do much for me. But then we went to Corfu, Greece, and I was on the beach a lot with the ocean and journaling, and I started to get more clear. And then we headed to Rome. I think we went to Florence first and then Rome, I think, if I'm recalling. This is many years ago. So when we got to Rome, I had been getting more and more clear. I was also spending a lot of time in the gardens, in the park in Rome. I'm blanking out right now on the name of the main park system. It will come to me. But basically, my connection with nature. And I rode horse. Well, no, I didn't start riding at that point. I hadn't started riding at that point. That's right. I had only been in Rome for a little while. But the more that I journaled and the more that I just kind of listened to myself, the more I started to feel this sense of needing to do something, like needing to act, needing to make a change, feeling called to do something, but being freaking terrified to do it. So that's the state of mind that I was in, and that's why I was in that state of mind. Now, there was an experience after being on the boat in Corfu, Greece, going to Italy, where I had an amazing experience on that ferry boat where I was journaling, and I had this amazing vision, and I'd never had anything like that. I can't remember if I talked about this in this show or not. I've talked about it in previous versions of podcasts that I've had before. And that was huge. That was huge. And it was a kind of like a real turning point, almost like a wake up call that I had some choice about what was going on or what I could do in my life. Because prior to that, I felt like I just had to react to my friend's decision and I had no choice. I felt like I had no power. I felt like I had no ability to do anything until on that ferry, on the water, being affected by the water. I'm sure I'll do an episode on the power of water because, because that's what the show is about. But it's like I got this like big wake up call. And then I go to Rome. And then I'm in Rome and I'm kind of just journaling more until we get to this spot, this scene where I'm on a park bench in Rome, in Italy, in the Piazza del Popolo, and I'm sitting there and I'm journaling. And what it was is we were slated to only spend a few days in Rome, and we were coming up on that deadline. Maybe we had stretched it out a little bit. I might have been like, yeah, I'm not ready to go yet, but I also wasn't ready to make any other drastic decisions either. I can't quite remember. But what I do remember is crystal clear as day is sitting on that bench and having my journal open and looking down to the ground because I was just lost. I felt like a lost, confused soul. And I looked down to the ground and there was like this, I don't want to call it a mud puddle because there was no mud, but there was like this rain puddle, like a rain puddle on the, on the ground, which it wasn't dirt. It was, in the piazza, it was some kind of stone or something on the ground. But there was this water puddle, and in the water puddle was a little bird. A little bird, and I don't know what kind it was, but it was taking a bath, just kind of stepping in and out of the water and kind of getting its wings wet and kind of like doing this thing that I've now noticed that little birds do, when they're kind of taking a little bath. They kind of step in and they kind of like let the water kind of fluff off, like kind of slide off their back, like kind of like almost like taking a little shower. Even though they don't have a shower head with water coming down, they just have it, in a puddle. And this bird, watching this bird was happy. This bird it felt so free. Felt just so free in this simplicity of this act of just taking like a bath in this, street water, really. And I'm trying to put to words how I felt in that moment, because like I said, I could just go back there. It's like the bird touched my soul. And what I was aware of at the time was just a kind of a feeling. Like it's almost like I just had like a jolt, like, oh, you have a choice. And I was like, No, I don't. I'm stuck. I'm so stuck. There's nothing I can do. I don't have money. I can't go to San Diego. What am I going to do? I don't want to go back to Pittsburgh. I don't want to live there permanently. Everything is screwed. But it was like there was this awareness that I had a choice. I had power. I had options. I had power. I wasn't aware that I had power back then. Now I see that's part of what was going on, but let's just put that part on hold. I felt like somehow there was this message in that moment that I had a choice. And that choice was that I didn't have to leave Rome. And this was interesting because I really felt when I got to Rome like it was a coming home. Like there's something about Rome that was in my soul. And I had no idea before I got there that I would ever have that kind of resonance with it. It's like I had been there before, or it's like I was, and I hadn't. It's like there was something about it. Now, I'm a quarter Italian. My grandfather was born in Italy, not in Rome, but an hour and a half east of Rome. So I do have Italian blood in me. But, I didn't feel this in Florence. I didn't feel it in the port town that we went through to take the ferry to Greece. I didn't feel this in other parts of Italy that I had been in, but I felt it in Rome. There was something there. It felt like something, and I couldn't explain it. It didn't make any sense, but I felt it. I felt it. I felt like I had unfinished business, which at the time, it just felt like I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave Rome, but I was supposed to. That's what I was supposed to do. And I just didn't feel comfortable with my friend anymore. I just felt like I didn't, it was just so stressful. And, but I didn't know what to do. Like I was in a foreign country and I was young and I don't know. I was terrified. And somehow watching that bird, it was just such this carefree little bird, just this happy little bird. I felt like I had an option. And the idea that came to me, the option was you don't have to leave. You don't have to leave. And I was like, what? Whoa, what do you mean I don't have to leave? But the thought was, and it wasn't as much a thought as a communication from my own deepest inner self. It was like, you can stay here. Just stay here. Just stay here longer. Just stay here longer and see what happens. Just stay here. Just stay here longer. That's it. That was the message. Just why go on to the next place? Just stay here. You feel good here. Just stay here. And I think I had been feeling called to do that and feeling called kind of to do that, but not feeling courageous enough to think I could do it. And then it's like I was on that park bench and I looked at that bird, and it's like this awareness just came to me. And I wrote in my journal, and then I went back and I made a decision, and I went back, and I might have waited a day to talk to my friend. I can't remember, because it's one thing to make a decision. It's another thing to communicate about it, especially if somebody's not going to be happy about it and you're feeling your own uncertainty about it. You want to do it, but you're also scared because you're kind of like, this does even seem crazy to me, but it feels like it's what I have to do, or it feels like the only right thing. Nothing else feels right. Everything else is screwed. So, I need to do this. And so I told my friend that I wasn't going to continue on with her and I was going to stay in Rome. Now, there's so many things that I've come to understand now about how we can listen to ourselves and learn to trust ourselves, and how I, for a long time, didn't listen to myself, or I then started listening to myself, but then I didn't trust myself, because it's kind of like a two-part deal. You start listening to yourself more and then more and then more, and you have to kind of learn to trust what you're listening to, because this is not something we're taught to do. This is at least the experience that I've had, and I've seen it happen with lots of people too. And so for me, what I realized is that's what was going on. Like, that's what I know now that was going on. I also know now that bird was not there randomly. Now, I've known this for a little while. I talked about it in my first version of my first ever podcast, or maybe it was my second podcast. I can't remember, but somewhere around 2018 to 2019, I did an episode where I talked a little bit about this experience in Rome, and I think that that's maybe where I came really to understand more about the bird. But what I know now, having had a lot of experiences with nature and birds, and understanding more about how nature can communicate with us and can help us communicate with ourselves, is that bird was not just a random bird. That bird right there, right then, it had like the same playbook as my own deepest self. Like, my own deepest inner self was like, Michelle, you need to let go of these plans that you had, and you need to do this other thing, because those other plans were not going to get you where you wanted to go. So scratch those plans. You're not going to move to San Diego. You're not going to, finish this trip with your friend. That's not going to happen. That is not what is going to work, because it's not what you really want. Some part of me knew what I really wanted more than what my brain and my thinking at the time and my awareness at the time was letting myself know and listen to. And that part of myself kind of took the reins and was trying to communicate with me. And that bird kind of was signed up and kind of subscribed to being kind of part of the playbook, if you will. Was like, was it kind of like in some other, world where, our souls are like, okay, who wants to help Michelle get on track and do what she actually wants? And the bird was like, me. Is that how it works? I don't know exactly how it works on that other end, although I do have some experiences being in the role of being kind of like a bird to other people, which I'll talk about, I'm sure, in, if not this podcast, other podcasts, because I've had that experience where I've had these crazy impulses to do things that then mean that I've had this impact on other people that was exactly what they were trying to understand at the time. And I've come to understand how that works. But what I know is that bird was not random. That bird was there to communicate with me something that was very important. And what did the bird communicate? The bird was not, it didn't speak. The bird wasn't like, hi, Michelle, my name's Harold. You're going to, step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this. No, birds don't speak. Neither do trees or whatever. Sometimes we can hear words through our own awareness that come from nature communicating to us, and we translate it into words. But, we don't actually hear the bird. The bird didn't sit there. It's not like I had a vision of a bird stopping and talking to me. It wasn't like that. The bird, through the bird's actions and me observing what the bird was doing and me sensing the energy of what the bird was experiencing and feeling, communicated something very important that I was trying to learn or to realize that I was calling myself to do, which was to let myself stop fighting, to let myself go with the flow, to let myself just have fun, to let myself listen. The bird was also showing me a sense of kind of like choice in the simplest matters, right? Because I had this big plan. I don't think I had an Excel spreadsheet back then, but later, believe me, I would have. But I had like lists and to-dos and I had like check boxes and all kinds of things, right? So I had it all planned out, how I was going to move to San Diego and how I was going to finish the trip and all of that. And none of it was going to work now because of this huge monkey wrench from my friend of saying she wasn't going to move to San Diego with me. And the bird reminded me of something so important, which is just how simple things can be when we just relax against trying to control everything and figure everything out, and we just let ourselves kind of like listen to ourselves and just kind of like tune in. And the bird was experiencing delight, really. And I had been experiencing delight in being in Rome, but I was too afraid to continue doing it. It's like the bird was reminding me and telling me, don't you want more of this? You can experience more of this. And you have the choice to do so. Don't continue on your journey. Stay here. And I did. And I ended up living there for a while. And as is often the case, not long after that, because I was like, well, I'll just stay here and I guess until I feel called to go somewhere else, and then my money will run out. But what happened? Like a very short period of time afterwards, I ended up getting a job offer. Somebody at the place where I was staying was leaving, and or somebody was leaving, I think. But more importantly, it was like the owner had realized that they could make money giving tours to the American speaking, pensione stayers, which were young 20-somethings like myself, and make money doing that. And that I could do that. That would be a good job for me. And all they needed to do was provide me with a place to live and a little bit of money for food. And then I'd be golden. And that's what I did. I actually, became a tour guide, taking American speakers, or not American, English speaking people on walking tours of Rome, which was just so cool. It was so cool. I got to meet amazing people and have amazing experiences and learn a lot about Rome and, explore stuff. And it was like it all just worked out. Now, I've learned a lot about this whole when things work out after I listen to myself thing, or how things work out when nature helps me get on track with something. Things just mysteriously, quote unquote, seem to just flow. I talk all about this in all my podcasts because I've learned that it is not so mysterious. I mean, it is. It's amazing when you see the power it can have on your life. But then you can start to understand that it is happening or could be happening all the time when you understand and are open to it and you learn how to utilize it. And that's what I love sharing. I love sharing about how to do this and how you can learn to do this and this comes from listening to yourself. That's why I do what I do and create what I create and all of it. Because I've experienced the most unfathomable, oh man, that is a mouthful, unfathomable, there we go, experiences. I mean, like, seriously, if someone was like, Michelle, you're gonna part ways with your friend and then you're gonna end up getting a job, staying there and, having these amazing experiences and, dating an American guy there, which I hadn't expected either. And all this other stuff, I'd have been like, what? But that's what happened. It also changed the entire trajectory of my life because living in Rome changed me in ways that are, oh my gosh, so immeasurable. The way people lived in the city of Rome was so core to something I had been wanting to learn how to do. And it's not like I was like, I want to learn how people live in the city of Rome. No, I wanted to learn how to live in a different way than I had been living. I had been brought up to live in the way I had been living in college. And I couldn't find it where I had been in Pittsburgh. That's part of why I thought, San Diego is warm and that kind of felt right. But living in Rome taught me stuff that I had been calling to know. And that's why that communication with that bird was so important that day, because it's what kind of hit me and made me say, I have a choice. And to listen to myself and to listen to that bird. Now, I have had so many experiences with birds. I cannot tell you the number of experiences I've had with birds. Oh, so many. And the ironic thing is that when I was little, aside from my mom liking bluebirds and cardinals, she did like looking at them outside of the window, and so did I. I grew up with a mom who was terrified of birds. She had been kind of like, had a bird fly at her when she was young, and she was terrified of birds. And so, that was kind of like in my household what was the case. And yet I can tell you that birds have been so huge. I will talk about more stories and more stories of birds and what they have done and how they've changed the trajectory of my life over and over and over again. But today I wanted to share about this little bird in Rome, because I would not be sitting where I am doing anything that I'm doing right now, or having had the experiences that I had after I left Rome. I wouldn't have made the choices I made had I not made that decision that day to stay in Rome. I just can't even tell you. I can't even tell you how different my life would be. And over and over and over again, nature has done this for me. I've talked about it in all these shows. Nature, different aspects of nature have helped me. But birds have been a particular aspect of nature that have done that for me. And that's why this show is dedicated to them. And I know I will talk more about birds in future episodes as well, because this is barely scratching, the tip of the iceberg. So that's what I wanted to share in today's episode. And I'm going to just leave it at that. And who knows, maybe I'll go out and go for a walk and I'll have another amazing experience with birds on our property, because we have a lot of them and they're amazing. They're a blessing. So I will leave it at that until the next time. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Power of Nature podcast. To learn more about me and my other offerings, you can visit my website at michellewaldo.com. That's MICHELLEWALDO.com.